Chapter 256. Florentia's Pov, the banquet which was prepared to celebrate the crown prince's appointment, was replaced by an emperor's coronation ceremony. For 3 days, the empire, which mourned the death of Jovanes, soon prepared to face a new emperor. The carriage carrying me arrived at the imperial palace, stopped. Florentia. The door opened and the figure of Perez was seen. He gave a deep kiss on the back of my hand. The imperial soldiers and servants standing nearby were coughing awkwardly and hurriedly looking away. Perez, even with my warning voice, Perez was firm. He was even smirking at me. After Jovane's death, Perez expressed his feelings more often than before. At least in front of me, I said, pulling my hand out. Hurry, let's go. Everyone must be waiting for us. No one in the Lambru Empire would ever complain if you made them wait for a few minutes, my tia. We can take our time. What do you mean, my tia? I tried protesting a few times because it's embarrassing, but Paris dismissed my dissatisfaction, saying, I'm just saying, what mine is mine. I shook my head and walked ahead. You should relish this moment as much as you struggled to get this far, Paris said, catching up behind me. Yeah, I definitely worked my ass off for this. Things that had happened so far passed, like a kaleidoscope in front of my eyes. But that doesn't justify my ill manners. How many people do you think are waiting for us there right now? Paris laughed again as I looked into his eyes. Are you ready? We finally stood in front of the banquet hall where the crowning ceremony will take place. Paris reached out as I nodded. Well then, shall we enter, High Lady of Lombardy? Of course, Crown Prince. Today is the last time I call Paris the Crown Prince. Before long, the door of the banquet hall, which had been firmly closed, began to open. Your Highness the Crown Prince and the High Lady, Florentia Lombardi, has arrived. The sound of the servant informing rang through the air. The light of the bright banquet hall was pouring out as if welcoming us, and there were countless people waiting for us. The paths we took led us to the high platform in front. It was a place where only the crown prince and his companion who were crowned as emperor could ascend. The carpet we stepped on under our feet seems to support me. I could find the familiar faces among the people lined up on both sides of the pathway. Grandfather, father, Shananet, and Clarivan standing next to him. Turning to the other side, I saw Avinox, Lorraine, and the twins standing together. In addition, I could see Chanton Susu, Migente Ivan, and the Patriarch of Brown and Ramona. They bowed their heads lightly to me. As we made eye contact with one person and the other, Paris and I grew closer to the podium. I turned my head and looked to the side. Paris was already looking at me. When did it start? Suddenly, such a question crossed my mind. Go up, Crown Prince, I said and stopped in front of the podium. The Lord of Lombardy will also go up with your highness. I expected to some extent. Since we are officially engaged, there would be no problem even if we stepped on the platform together. However, I wanted to confirm with Perez. As Perez said, it was an incredibly long journey. The question was whether I can share this moment that I won at the end of that difficult road. Tia, Perez said, looking only at me, in this vast space and countless people. Look around. All of this is accomplished by you. Perez's hand, which held me, squeezed my hand a little more firmly, and he asked me with a picturesque smile, would you please go up with me, Lord Lombardy? Somehow his voice made me laugh. I nodded and answered, yes, Crown Prince. We looked at each other at the same time. We took the first step on the podium. Asterisk, 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 Florentia's Pov. Lady Florentia, wake up. A small voice woke me up. I fell asleep late last night, looking into the papers, so my stiff eyes weren't quite open yet. It's time for you to wake up. Even though it was early in the morning, it was a friendly voice that did not bother my ears. Good morning, Caitlin. When I, who couldn't even open my eyes properly, spoke with one hand waving, buried in a floppy pillow, I heard Caitlin smiling softly. Can I sleep a little longer? Did you go to bed late last night? I asked your Majesty to let you go to bed early. It's not Paris' fault, it's my fault. I insisted on working more. In the end, I was laid on the bed by Paris holding the papers in my hand last night. Estira also said at the last checkup that you should be careful of fatigue. Caitlin said in a stern voice. Caitlin, who has declared herself to be my maid in honor after Paris ascended the throne, has been serving me without borrowing the hands of others. Laurel, who has her second child, is no longer my maid in honor, but a close friend who visits and talks to me from time to time. I know. I'm hungry. With Caitlin's help, I washed, prepared, and headed to the restaurant. Good morning, everyone. My family, who were eating in advance of my greeting, looked at me. Please be strong enough to fill your stomach. I said that to the approaching servant and sat down. You must have a busy schedule today. My father, who arrived from Cheshire yesterday, looked at me anxiously with a tired face that had not yet been relieved of his journey. We have a meeting. The agenda is also an agenda. Claravan nodded at me and agreed. It's probably a long meeting. Please have a good meal, my lord. And Pellet too. It's actually my second bowl. I drank warm tea and asked my father, how's the port coming along? I haven't to increase the number of docks, but the construction is slow, so I am very worried. Well, how about meeting Violet once while you're here? I was supposed to call them in advance and meet them this afternoon. Half of the supplies to and from the port are from the top of Lombardy and the top of Pellet, so if we put our heads together, we'll figure something out. I expressed my consolation by pouring a little more warm tea into my father's empty teacup. Saying so with a tired face, I'm going to sleep in the Imperial Palace tonight. If anything happens, send someone to the Empress Palace, father. Yes, yes. Father nodded, rubbing his eyes, apparently still half asleep. If the Lord were to stay in the palace today, the mansion would be empty. I know. We're going on a month-long off-season training today. Recently, the twin, who have intensively grown their muscles in recent years, said, picking up a mountain of pancakes with a fork. Will you leave today, aunt? At my words, Shannonette wiped her mouth and nodded her head. A new mineral was discovered in the north. I think I should probably go see it myself. It was so like Shannonette, who likes to check everything with her own eyes. You must be having a hard time because it's summer. I still have to be sure, Shannonette said firmly. I hurriedly finished my breakfast with a short conversation, confirming the family's current situation. Valet, are you ready? Yes, my lord, Clarivan said as he emptied all his coffee. Good work. When I left the restaurant with my father's greeting and arrived at the front door, Granny welcomed me with a large bundle of documents. You're here, sister. You still don't have breakfast, do you, Granny? I feel sick all day long when I eat something in the morning. I'll take care of my lunch instead. Granny, who has a small mouth, said with a grin. But you'd better eat it on a day like today. It was time to get on the courage thinking about feeding Granny some fruits during the break of the meeting. Are you going to the Imperial Palace? Oh, Grandpa. Maybe he came out for a morning walk, but I could see my grandfather walking slowly with his hands behind his back. Next to him was Ralph, a puppy that my grandfather has been raising for some time now. He was big, but he was very gentle and intelligent. No wonder the whole mansion fell in love with him. No matter what happens today, you shouldn't back down, Tia. My grandfather's smile was gentle, but his eyes shone as sharply as before. When have I ever stepped back? At my answer, my grandfather grinned at me and nodded his head. Yes, yes, I'm sure you'll take care of it. Grandpa said that, patted me tenderly on my shoulder, and started walking with Ralph again. It was on the side of the evergreen forest. I stood there and looked at my grandfather's relaxed back, then climbed into the carriage. The carriage carried me, Granny, and Clarivan, ran nonstop, and reached the Imperial Palace. Woo! As I walked through the corridor of the Imperial Palace, as a sign of a little nervous, Granny echoed. Granny, yes, sister, trust me and follow me. I said, patting Granny's back. It couldn't hurt. It could hurt. As always, Granny smiled and nodded. As we approached the conference room, the knights guarding the door quickly greeted us with courtesy. Open the door. In my words, the attendants bowed their heads and opened the door of the conference room. The heavy door moved and poured out the buzzing sound of conversation that was contained in it. It was probably the most fierce battleground ever since I became a householder. But I wasn't nervous. We've prepared everything to win today. As I walked into the conference room, hundreds of nobles rose in unison. You're here, Lord Lombardi. I nodded leisurely towards them and looked at my seat, greeting them. Behind me were Clarivan and Granny. I felt a gaze and turned my head, and there I saw Perez, who was seated in the Emperor's seat, looking at me. Good morning, Matriarch of Lombardy. He said hello first. Did you have a good breakfast, Your Majesty? Yes, what about the Lord? Me too. I answered briefly and added a smile. Today is the day, don't you think so? In short, let's stick together properly. The Lord of Lombardy is here, so the conference will begin. The conference began when the nobles who had risen for me sat down again. It was an uncommon day of peacefulness for the Lumbru Empire, which has never seen before. End of chapter 255. 56. Oh, so that was the last chapter. This is the side story. That was the ending. Okay. Chapter 257. The side story of Florentia. MTL edited quality. Chapter 1. Mim, mim. Summer when cicadas cry loudly. Clarivan Pellet, the top's lord at the Lombardy top, was walking along the wide corridor of the Lombardy mansion. As he stretched out his long legs and moved, his hem fluttered long, and his blond and blue eyes twinkled in the midday sunlight. At that appearance, many employees of the mansion who worked around him looked at him with enchantment. Indeed, Clarivan couldn't notice such a thing, and he just took his step by thinking about something. He met the matriarch randomly. I can't believe he came in, he ignorant bastard. When he recalled an uninvited visitor who had come without an appointment in advance, Clarivan's straight eyebrows were wrinkled. Well, I'm sure this is all going to the way of the matriarch. There was a statement in advance. If he comes in unexpectedly, don't send him back and let him know. All have plans. When he remembered her, the light and pillar of Lombardy, a smile appeared on Clarivan's face. Without stopping, he looked inside the mansion and out of the window. The heat is in full swing, so it could have gotten messy and loose somewhere. Wherever the eyes met, there was no place that was not perfect. Of course, it always has, but in the opinion of Clarivan Pallet, who is quite subjective, Lombardy has become more perfect in about a year and 3 months. It was the time when the current matriarch of Lombardy, Florentia Lombardi, succeeded in the position of the householder. 447 days to be exact. Clarivan muttered proudly. It was a number that was accurately calculated by adding 1 day each time he wake up every morning. It was also true that at first there was an easy gaze on the new householder, both inside and outside Lombardy. The character Florentia Lombardi was in many ways an uncommon choice. However, the new householder of Lombardy, who heard the story, said with a distinctive, confident smile, "As time goes by, everyone will naturally know, well, why I became the matriarch of Lombardy." And it was just like that. Out of concern, she quickly began to take center stage as a householder, like a person born from the beginning to become a Lombardi's householder. She pretended to do complicated things without the help of others and made the right choice every time without being blocked by difficult decisions. It was truly every day that everyone who was serving the new matriarch of Lombardy was admiring. So the past year and 3 months have passed quickly, as Florentia assures, and as Clarivan expects. Now no one dared question the new matriarch of Lombardy's actions. Whoever sees Lombardy was getting stronger than ever in the history of the family. Clarivan's shoulders shrugged at the pride of the person who had such a person right next to him, at the pride of being the closest limb. Oh, Mr. Bate. Clarivan had just found Bate walking out of the gallery of the mansion and was approaching. It's been a long time, Sir Clarivan. Bate, the guild leader of the Information Guild, greeted with his mysterious amber eyes bent round. It's it's always been a thought, but the name of the dessert shop he runs, it's a deep smile that But like the name of the dessert shop he runs, it's a deep smile that reminds him of caramel. The matriarch is inside. She's looking at Alpha Eugene's work. You mean the new one? Yes, I'm sure she likes it, but she's feeling particularly good today. Good thing. Clarivan hung his head to remember the character who was now waiting for him in the householder's office. Let's go in. Yes, of course. They were working closely with Matriarch enough to call themselves the left and right arms of Laurentia Lombardi, but the two did not talk about their work at all. It was because what each other knew was too sensitive. Tap tap. Clarivan's footsteps rang louder as he entered the gallery with a high ceiling and an open space. In the space covered with white marble, all kinds of rare artworks show off their beauty. In the deepest and widest place, the work of Alpha Eugene which Bate talked about was held in place. The title of the work is World Tree. The World Tree, the symbol of the Lombardi family, was embodied by its organ, woodwork, and was a huge sculpture of several pieces connected together. It was an artwork created by burning the soul without a single day off for over a year to celebrate the fact that Florentia Lombardi, who recognized his talent as a child, became the matriarch. A large wooden pillar that can only be hugged by three adult males holding their hand in hand and countless branches extending from it in all directions. It was magnificent as if it were supporting the world, not the ceiling of a gallery, but also blazing as if it were about to devour everything. And below it, a person with a presence that is not pushed by the energy of the sculpture. Lombardi's householder, Florentia Lombardi, smiled as she looked back at Clarivan. Welcome, Lord Pellet. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. He calls me like that. Clarivan spoke in an uncharacteristically uneven voice. Please call me as comfortable as before, but now you're the Lord of Lombardy. Stop. Although I was blurred, Clarivan didn't even budge. He's so determined in a weird place. All right, Lord Clarivan. Lord, that honor is. I'm calling Clarivan's name, but I can't speak informally. Then Clarivan laughed with a shallow sigh as if it couldn't be helped. I smiled face to face with that Clarivan, then turned my head and looked up at the sculpture of the world tree again. I felt as if I had become a lucky human being who witnessed the world tree that exists in the legend. After standing still for a moment, Clarivan let me know in a soft voice behind my back. Well, the matriarch. Tell me, I'm sorry for your appreciation, but Chanton Susu is waiting in the office right now. Clarivan's speech speaking the name of the patriarch of Susu, the great lord of the south, was quite harsh. That means he doesn't like him that much. However, I did not respond to that remark. It's only because it's time to come. But what? Besides, it's him who's in a hurry, not me. Instead, I reached out and swept the hard surface of the world tree. Originally, it was said that artworks were to be appreciated only with the eyes, but this world tree sculpture was made by Alpha Eugene in consideration of the touch as well. Only me, Clarivan, yes, the matriarch. What would it have been like if the branches of this world tree didn't stretch out in that shape? What? What if there weren't any flowers of the world tree that bloomed there? No, what if this sculpture was just a little smaller than this? I smiled as I immediately met Clarivan's blue eyes staring at me to read my intentions. Don't you think it must have been a pretty nice sculpture, though? Like the sculpture I saw in my previous life. With my help, Alpha Eugene started sculpting in earnest at a much earlier age than before, even with full support from Lombardi. Since the genius is winged, it seems obvious that Alpheogene succeeded faster and gained more fame, and there was already one sculpture that had been passed on to the Lombardi family. The woman who cares for supplings, presented at the Lombardi scholarship banquet, held to secretly bring the Patriarch of Brown. So I thought it was just passing by. Alpheogene eventually created his masterpiece, the World Tree, and dedicated it to the new owner, me, as if it were his destiny to produce the masterpiece. What I want to say is that what will eventually happen, but some things have changed. The World Tree this time was a little different from that of my previous life. Flowers which were not previously present were added, and branches were drawn in a more dynamic shape. And more than anything else, the scale has become more grand. But how to get it out of that fate and how to use it depends on the person in the end. Like Alpha Eugene, who created a more beautiful world tree with his superior skills than in my previous life. Then I tapped Clarivan's shoulder with affection and said, You said he's waiting. I'm going now. I want to make him wait longer when I think about what has been disturbing me. With that in mind, I took a very leisurely step from the gallery to my office. I deliberately stopped in the middle to see flowers and talked to Hiringa's householder of the Scholarship Foundation, who was passing by. And when I finally entered the office, the Matriarch of Lombardy, Chanton Susu, who was sitting, stood up and called me. He was a nobleman with no original expression, but his impression was even harder today. It seems like a person full of anger. However, I know too well that there's a touch of impatience underneath that thick expression, less expression. I stood still without saying anything for a while and appreciated the face of Chanton Susu. Eventually, Chanton Susu couldn't stand it anymore and asked, "What was written in the letter? Is it true?" "Yeah, he should have come out like that long ago," I said, smiling at Chanton Susu with a full heart of joy. "It's been a month since I saw you, Patriarch Susu." End of chapter 257. Chapter 258. A month ago, the Lombardi mansion. I'm pissed off. A bunch of papers in my hand lay on the table with a throbbing heavy noise. The report I received a while ago was hitting up my head. It's been a long time. I feel like this. Still tapping on the table with my fingertips and waiting for my mood to calm down. The more I think about it, the more upset I get. I expected some damage, but I didn't expect it to be this bad. I narrowed my eyes and glared at the papers. Isn't that such a person from the beginning? There is no trust at all. Clarivan spoke low, frowning over his glasses. I didn't like him from the beginning, for me. The householder of Pallet, no, Clarivan. When I called him the householder of Pallet, like the habit I used to call in public, Clarivan, who looked at me as if he was disappointed, nodded immediately at my corrective title. Yes, the matriarch. Are you free today? It just so happens that today is the day of the conference where I personally put forward the agenda, I said, pointing my finger at the stack of papers Clarivan brought. I'm going to take this and check it properly. Would you like to go together? On my way, I told you I'd be leaving work right after work today. As expected, Clarivan, that was when we were nodding meaningfully while making eye contact. Tia, why don't you finish your meal? My father, who was listening to our conversation next to me, said quietly, tearing the fresh bread with his hands. Only then did I realize that we were sitting at a lunch table and a bunch of people, and I reflected on myself with a bunch of people, and I reflected on myself. The same goes for Clarivan. Doesn't the food cool down? Oh yeah, I'm sorry, Clarivan answered quickly, picking up the bread as if he had ever glistened his eyes in sorrow. It's the Clarivan that everyone but me is scared of and hard to treat. Rather, he's especially weak for my father, who everyone is comfortable with. It seemed that there were similarities between people, such as scissors, rocks, and paper. As I looked at my father and Clarivan for a moment, I shook my head and picked up a piece of bread. The soft and fluffy bread looked appetizing at a glance. Yeah, I'll have to eat a lot to fight well in a little while. Thinking so, I was looking for butter for bread when I suddenly remembered something. Wait, come to think of it, this bread is made of flour, right? Clarivan, who was about to put bread in his mouth at my word, also paused. I glared at the bread for a moment with a vigilant gaze, then asked at the butler who was waiting near the table where we were eating. Butler John, is this bread using flour from that region? Because the wheat is of good quality anyway. Yes, it is. Then I don't want to eat bread today. My body won't receive it. I might have an upset stomach. Me too. Clarivan, who had been agonizing for a while, followed me and laid the bread down. Phew, my father shook his head and laughed as if he couldn't stop us. Does my grandfather eating in his study room today? Yes, the matriarch. These days he does it every day. It was when I talked to John and pushed the basket full of bread far away with my fingertips and just turned to the steak on the plate. My lady, the matriarch, an employee of the mansion, entered the dining room with a letter in his hand. Oh, it's Lorraine. The letters were filled with letters that were as soft and pretty as the person who wrote them. Lorraine, what did she say? The twins who were eating fruit leaned towards me and asked if I had already finished eating. Before the two reached out to the letter paper, I quickly talked about the content. I guess she's busy preparing for the wedding. And as planned, Lorraine and Avenox, who followed Eastern customs and ended their 1 year engagement period, should have already had their wedding last year. But they couldn't, and the reason is, Lix is also growing well. Full name, Velix Lumen. It is the name of the son of Lorraine and Avenox. The unexpected early gift led to a very slight change of order, with Lorraine giving birth to Lix and then holding a wedding ceremony. Oh, I can't wait to see Lix. Me too. He's cute just by looking at the portrait. He's more resembled to Avenox than I thought, so I'm laughing a little. Oh, I admit that too. Lix's portrait, which Lorraine sent last month, had a mini Avenox. Everyone who saw the painting was amazed and laughed. It said children faces change every day, but are they much different from portraits now, mother? Gilio asked Shannonette, who was tapping the corner of her mouth with a napkin. At that time, the kids are definitely sleeping and getting bigger when they wake up, but it still remains the same as Confucius Lumen. Ah, Leeks should have looked like Lorraine. Myron was sad, shouting, "It's cute now, but it would have been cuter then. They don't grow up even when they get older." I spoke to the twins. Well, see him in we'll see him in a few weeks away. Anyway, but hold on until then. About although Lorraine was rushed to the east, the situation was unfavorable, so we couldn't attend her engagement ceremony. As for the wedding, we are going to the east a week later for her family to attend together. By the way, does His Majesty really accompany you, Tia? Oh, that's at my father's question. I smiled awkwardly and nodded. It must be. You want to go? Can I stop it? If the emperor wants to do it, who's stopping him? No, I can stop him, but how shiny his eyes were when I told the story. I couldn't bring myself to say no. Wouldn't it be dangerous, though? To Perez, when I asked my father blinked when I asked, my father blinked his eyes and thought for a moment, and he immediately laughed. That's right. Although it is unusual for the emperor to come in person, it is also a good way to control the public sentiment of the East. The eastern region was only a few decades after being incorporated into the empire, so it was still a region requiring careful management in many ways. By the way, Tia, Shananet called me. How's the preparation going for your wedding? Oh, there's still a lot left. Well, me and Paris' scheduled engagement period is 2 years until Granny graduates from the academy. There was still less than half of the time left. Paris and I are also busy. I am Lombardi and Paris is busy caring for the empire. That's right, if you could just do it right now. Shannonet's eyes glanced at the bundle of papers still lying on the table, saying so. Even though she doesn't show off the surface, it was Shannonet that she responded as sensitively as me to touching Lombardi. It's time to get going, said Gilio, who checked my plate that was almost empty. If we leave now, we'll be able to arrive right before the conference. It may not be possible to hold a meeting without Tia just because it is a little late. Everyone in the seat, including me, nodded. Let's go then. I stood up and said, I took the materials I had thrown on the table myself. This is my weapon today. After a while, the carriage carrying me and Clarivan arrived at the Imperial Palace. The twins who were escorting the carriage outside, along with other knights, was flapping their knight's uniform, saying it was hot. Why don't we go into the conference room together? It should be cool inside. Well, no, we'll be outside. Yes, we're comfortable out there. There's a lot of people in there. Gilio and Mayron answered strangely, avoiding my gaze, like there's something very hidden at a glance. Come to think of it, even today the two said, let's start first, right? What's wrong with you two? I was saying I had a hunch, but now the time was approaching for the conference to begin. Do it one at a time, one at a time. See you later. Let's go, Clarivan. After seeing the awkward smiling faces of the twins waving at me, I stepped into the conference room with Clarivan. Have you come, the Matriarch of Lombardy? Oh, today you are also with the Lord of Palatop. You're here, early Bern. You're here, you're here early, Bernie. As you get old, the only thing that disappears is morning sleep. The Patriarch of Burney greeted me first and laughed happily. If a hunting competition is still held, the one who wins first place easily over all young people will pretend to be weak. But that was Burney's way of life, laughing, pretending to be weak, and pretending not to know. It was the Patriarch of Burney's way to snatch the opponent's weaknesses through such a vigilant gap. I took a look inside the conference room filled with nobles. None of the central nobles here had their own weapons like Burney, because this was a battleground where the fight of politics took place. Now the meeting is about to begin. I see. Then shall we go to our seats? I will pave the way. Let's go this way, the Matriarch of Lombardy. Before I know it, the so-called pro-Lombardy nobles who came to me at the entrance of the conference room welcomed me in a boisterous manner. As I began to take a step, the empire's most prominent noblemen stepped back like water splits. In that scene, which was now accustomed I slowly sat down in the seat of the householder of the Lombardy. To the left of the seat, the emperor. Then I slowly raised my head and looked straight ahead, the seat facing me head on. I looked at the man sitting in the place where the Patriarch of Angenus once sat, a man with unwavering short hair and blunt face, but a sword-like eyes. It was the center of the pro-Shushu against the pro-Lombardy, and the great landlord of the south, Chanton Susu. End of chapter 258. Chapter 259. Smirk. As our eyes met, Chanton Susu stood up and he raised his head toward me and laughed. It was an attitude that was likely to receive a loss of or hit, but I'm not the one who will be provoked by that degree of provocation. What do you think people are? I held on to my expressionless face and looked at Chanton Susu still. I knew this would happen. In the process of raising Paris to the throne, Chanton Susu and I were on the same side. I who helped Ivan in the north and opened the trade route for the East Lumen, and Chanton Susu who dried up the emperor's money and took the land of Angenes. However, after defeating the common enemy and achieving the goal, the cooperation was over. Chanton Susu's action continued as I had expected in front of the vassal families before inheriting over the household from my grandfather. It was said that it was to destroy Angenes, but too much of the Susu's grain was loosened throughout the empire. The long-lasting harvest in the south and the eastern and western regions that suffered in the coming years. Naturally, the empire's dependence on the grain of the Susu farming, especially wheat, became too high. Chanton Susu took advantage of that point without hesitation. Gradually, the price of the grains of the Susu farming began to rise. Naturally, many families in need of wheat began to take notice of Chanton Susu, and the power centered around Susu was rapidly established. As a result, it's the Patriarch of Lumen. I heard that he arrived from the east yesterday. I guess he has attended the conference without taking a break. Avenak's father, Indit Lumen, sat in the right chair of Chanton Susu, which had been empty all along. Seeing that, the nobleman near me smirked. Ha, ungrateful fellow. How much did Lombardi's householder give to Lumen's convenience? But he's stuck with the Susu just like that. The grumbling of the the grumbling of the pro-Lombardy nobles brought laughter to my ears. A year and a half ago, the Luman family in the east was Lombardy's closest ally because the eastern trade and cruise travel that I promoted saved the entire eastern part, which was isolated. Even Lorraine was engaged to Avenox, the son of the Patriarch of Lumen. Today, however, the Patriarch of Lumen was one of Chanton Sisu's close associates. Where will your eternal friend be in this political world? You're here, the Patriarch of Ivan, Northern Megante Ivan, who had been struck in the courage with me, put down his cane and said, it is inevitable to use it because of an injured leg in the carriage accident, but I guess who is the northern part of the Patriarch of Ivan, famous for underground minerals. There were several thick jewels embedded in the cane. Our northern part of the country is self-sufficient and resource-rich. But so we don't have to be wary of Susu, but the East is not the case. That's true though. The Patriarch of Susu is just a snake-like person who has been well aware of that weakness. Isn't it, the Matriarch of Lombardy? It's a snake. If a snake is such a big snake, shouldn't it be beaten with a weapon? I laughed at the question of the Patriarch Megante Ivan. Then he leaned close and talked, looking at the Patriarch of Lumen and Chantan Susu, who had a secret conversation. I like to say that we don't have an eternal friend. It looks like the Patriarch of Browns aren't going to attend today. Chantan Susu, isn't he so pushy with food? Come and cast a vote in his favor. It's best not to attend. If the family Brown, who was greatly favored by the Lombardy family, were on the side of the Susu, it would be betrayal. Betrayal. The Patriarch of Lumen's shoulders shrunk greatly when the Patriarch of Bernie shouted betrayal. On the contrary, however, a deeper laughter stood during the daytime of Chanton Susu. It was as if to say, get as wet as you can. As the harvest season approaches, the attitude of the Patriarch of Susu has become more and more elusive. Soon it was time to harvest wheat. Local families that need the wheat for autumn and winter are bound to stand up in Chanton Susu's words. He's a smart person. It was a political sense that could not be thought of as a person who knew nothing but a sword all his life and was the leader of the night. So it tastes like sticking more. Suddenly, Chanton Susu was staring at me, unlike Angenes, who always burned his naked hostility. It was a look that felt a cold win-win feeling. Okay, let's stick together. I grinned and nodded just as Chanton Susu did. Your Majesty the Emperor. At that time, the door of the conference room opened and the attendant of the imperial palace entered and announced. Everyone gathered in the conference room got up from their seats. After a while, Paris appeared, black conquest embroidered with gold thread, red eyes seen under the gently pushed black hair and sculptural features. He was originally a handsome Paris, but he was a guy who was getting more and more heavy charms that are hard to describe in words. Whose fiancé is he? He's so handsome. I was looking at Paris as he rose to the seat of the emperor on the podium with a proud heart. I glanced at his head. Paris' facial expression was strange when our eyes met. He paused for a moment and he seemed strangely depressed. It might be the same expressionless face to others, but it was definitely different in my eyes. I mean, the tail of his eye went down slightly. I was a little worried about Paris' expression, but I quickly cleared up my mind. Let's start the convention. With the chairman's words, the door of the conference room was firmly closed. Everyone paid attention to Paris, who sat in a high position. After a moment of heavy silence, today's agenda is the trade conflict between Lombardy and Susu. Paris' low voice rang in the big conference hall. As I did, he put off his personal feelings, returning to the face of the perfect emperor. At the same time, I could feel some of the nobles around me tense up. Unlike the days of Emperor Jovanes, the nobles struggled and feared Paris. There is no value in ascending the throne, as they have never been helped by power other than Lombardy and Susu. The emperor who did not notice the nobles had absolute power, Perez said, glancing through the documents posted by the chairman of the aristocracy. Currently, both Lombardy and Pellet stop entry into the Susu estate. Currently, both Lombardy and Pellet stop entry into the Susu estate has been stopped. It was a recent incident by Chanton Susu at the entrance to the southern border of the land of Susu. It was not passing upstream of the Lombardy stop. To be precise, the logistics of the Lombardy family who left the goods to Lombardy stop and the pro-Lombardy family were all blacked. It is said that Lombardy has posted this agenda. Please describe it, the Matriarch of Lombardy. Paris doesn't reveal his personal relationship with me in public. It was what I asked for, and Paris was doing well with my demands without exception. As I slowly got up from my seat, I could feel the gaze of spirit flying in and blooming. I looked at the eyes one by one and opened my mouth. Unless there is a situation in which the war of the territory takes place, it is a long-standing principle among our nobles that not to prevent the trade traffic of the top. In addition, Lombardy and Pallet Corporation are also promised to help keep the top flowing, instead of paying huge tolls to Susu every year. I lightly picked up the papers that Clarivan gave me and said, nevertheless, Susu is causing such great damage by unilaterally blocking the trade traffic. I, Florentia Lombardi, as the owner of the Lombardy Stop and Pallet Corporation, demanded that Susu to resume the trade traffic as soon as possible and compensate for the damage reasonably. With a nod from the audience agreeing with me, Paris asked Chanton Susu this time, the Patriarch of Susu, do you have anything to say about this? Yes, Your Majesty. Chanton Susu, who was only loyal to the imperial family, stood up from his seat and bowed to Paris once before starting his speech. Blocking the entrance to the top was an inevitable measure because they caused security problems in Susu. The wanted people were mixed up, and the villagers were in danger. And this would be more important than the execution of the contract. Then Perez looked at me silently, he saying I can speak freely. I rebutted against Chanton Susu. Why don't you check the mixed wanted people from the security forces of Susu, but to the top of Lombardy, and that the land of Susu, where the wanted is bright, and that the checkpoint is the predecessor, the Patriarch Chanton Susu. If it weren't for the top of Lombardy, it wouldn't have happened in the first place. You're being unreasonable. If there's a security problem, it's time to strengthen the security. It is not only a violation of the contract to stop the entire trade traffic because of an unsuccessful event, but you may not know that it is more ineffective than the benefits to both sides. For me, the safety of the local people is more important than anything else, so I just took measures. Even though there are 100 benefits, it is unavoidable to keep one of the most important things. On the outside, it pretends to be for the local people quite a bit, but it doesn't make sense. It is none other than the local people of the Chanton Susu who suffers the most from this decision. It was natural that because Lombardy and Pallet, who accounted for more than half of the export volume of Susu estate disappeared, those who were doing business with them and the farmers of Susu who had decided to supply the top end grain were looking at the sky with their both hands empty. Chanton Susu was just a great man to chew like bitter medicine that took 100 damages for one thing he wanted. It was only a choice for the people of Susu that banned the traffic. You mean to make the crops they've grown, blood and sweat, rot in the warehouse? Chanton Susu's eyes, which had always been relaxed at my words, were acrimonious. I didn't avoid those eyes either. He was arguing like he was spinning around in the ice, but I knew well what was under the surface of the water. While chewing and swallowing 100 bitter drugs, it was clear that Chanton Susu was aiming for Lombardy and Pallet Corporation's trade traffic, a place where the two tops carry a lot of supplies every day, like ants moving in rows. It stands like the yoke of a broken delgal, a land surrounded by the land of Susu and the center of eastern trade, which once belonged to Susu. It was Cheshire, my father's estate. Since the Patriarch of Susu has chosen it as the Lord, then let me choose as the owner of the top, and I won't be able to wait and see. How about, for example, the top of Lombardy and the top of Pellet completely cut off from the south? End of chapter 259. Chapter 260. If the top of Lombardy and the Pellet Corporation completely cut off the trade traffic to the south, the result was obvious. Susu sells grain through several tops, but of course, the biggest clients aren't my two tops. Broadly speaking, the western trade was undertaken by the top of Lombardy, and the eastern trade was undertaken by the Pellet Corporation. Of course, Susu will be fine if they don't sell grain to the east and west as they do now. The profits of the entire estate will be greatly reduced, but the local people of Susu will not boil their stomachs. But that wasn't the picture Chanton Susu wanted. Just as my father wished when he built the port for Cheshire, it was Chanton Susu's desire to prosper in abundance, not just to live on grain. The same was true for Lombardy and Pallet Corporation. Even if we don't deal with the South right now, the Lombardy family won't fall for the Pallet Corporation, or the Pallet Corporation won't fall. Eastern trade is difficult, but it can be done by land as before. However, the extreme confrontation between Lombardy and Susu was nearly a great loss for the entire empire. The longer the eye contact fight between me and Chanton Susu on both sides of the conference room, the more silent the day was. Stop. Perez's short, firm words cut the tension that had been strained. Pellet Corporation note, bring it. With a light hand gesture, what Perez pointed was a bunch of papers in my hand, the details of the loss caused by the incident and the toll contract which Susu were tied together. When Clarivan delivered what was in my hands, Perez read it down without hesitation. Perez, who had rubbed his forehead a couple of times with his long fingers, opened his mouth. In the contract, it is a violation of Susu. There was a sound of gulping saliva that seemed to come from the camp of on the other side of me. However, he couldn't express his dissatisfaction in front of Perez and just sighed. The state of Sisu will cooperate to resume operations immediately, and according to the contract, double the amount of loss to Lombardy. Okay, Your Majesty. Chanton Sisu replied politely, but I didn't laugh. Rather, I had to try not to make an expression. Suspicious. I would rather have Chanton Sisu run wild and said, You can't do that, you're being unreasonable. No matter how loyal he is to Perez, there's a big reason for him to be pressured to defend himself and even try to protest. But what a naive attitude. It's like the Matriarch of Lombardy. Yes, I heard Perez calling me, but I couldn't look at him from Chanton Sisu. Obviously, I am the winner of this conference. Somehow the winner was over there, so my gut was saying, the Matriarch of Lombardy is also the owner of the two tops, so make sure you pay more attention to the security of your trade traffic. I'll do that. Pep, pep. Someone has been playing a joke on my back, and I narrowed my eyes to a situation where it seemed that only I wasn't seeing it. Even though he paid a tremendous amount of compensation, the calm Chanton Sisu's face was annoying. More than anything else, that shabby face bothers me. I felt sorry for the door of the conference room that had already been closed, so I waited for a while and woke up from my seat. Lombardy, of course. Twice the compensation against that nasty Chanton Susu. No, they've got it. Isn't it clear from the beginning that it was a violation of the contract? That's right. Actually, this wasn't anything to do except come to the conference. Today's meeting will end with this. Paris, who was briefly speaking, stood up right away. Oh, he was just gonna have a little chat. I kept staring at Shanton Susu and then came to my senses. I looked at Perez one step later, but all I could see was the backs of the aides following the Emperor. I was going to ask why his expression was like that before the meeting began. Pro-Lombardy nobles around me gathered their mouths to congratulate me, but those things didn't come to my ears. Then Caravan approached and spoke in a low, secret voice. The matriarch. Maybe there's a little something. Do you think so, Clarivan? I replied with a glimpse of Chanton Sususit. I thought he was a tough opponent, but I smirked without realizing it. I have to ask Bate to come into the mansion tomorrow. It's completely different from dealing with Angenes. It was the Angenes family who clearly showed their ulterior motives and even touched a little bit. They only screamed loudly. Even the Empress, who was smart, could not fix her bad temper, so she could not see the forest at all the time. Eh, However, Chanton Susu is different. That blunt face is not what he is thinking about. His quiet hands are quick and bold. Several times since becoming a householder, Chanton Susu's hunting beast like quick movements have struck. The matriarch of Lombardy. Just like now, I turned to the voice I heard behind my back. Well, the patriarch of Susu. Chanton Susu, who is one head taller than me, came close by half a step. The quality seems to be rich in hair color, but it doesn't know what's inside and the side of the person who exudes the sense of oppression. For some reason, a big black bear appeared. I came to apologize for this. Do you mean to play the second round following the conference? I could feel the eyes of the nobles around me who were leaving the conference room, stopping one by one, looking this way. This, for whatever reason, it was a violation of the contract first. It was still an innocent voice and attitude, but I could know for sure. This black bear is making fun of me now. Let's get it straight. The patriarch of Susu. It's not became a violation. It's a violation. Do you still don't understand what the double indemnity means? That. Chanton Susu was silently looking at me for a while. I looked straight into his eyes and raised one corner of my mouth at an angle. And even if this is the case, the compensation will not be reduced by a penny. Ah, dear, Chanton Susu spoke in an insincere way as if he were reading a book written by someone else. Even though I apologized myself, at the moment I remembered the words of the Patriarch of Burney who compared Chanton Susu to a snake. It's not a snake, it's a red-banded snake, a large, thick, poisonless snake moving slowly. It has a reddish-brown back, a yellowish-brown abdomen, and black vertical patterns all over the body, and has a meaning as like person. and and has a meaning as a sly person. At the moment, I wanted to break that expressionless mask that seemed to have no redness. In the first place, it wasn't very regrettable. It's an easy apology. Why should I? Watching Chanton Susu's eyes droop for a moment, I continued. Don't you just blow out the smoke while making a fire from the beginning? What's an apology? Then the black bear's face was clearly hardened, and that reaction gave me confidence. Chanton Susu did it on purpose, even though he knew I'd call a conference if he pressed my tops, as if trying to catch my attention and prevent me from seeing something. As Chanton Susu did, I stepped closer and smiled. Let me give you just two pieces of advice, the patriarch of Susu. I raised my index finger. One, don't forget that farming is the will of the sky. How do you know what kind of punishment will come down if you keep making such bad sympathies? What do you mean? Second, I cut off Chanton Susu's words, which tried to refute, and I raised my two fingers. My people are important to me, just as the local people of Susu is important to the patriarch. I know the love of Chanton Susu is to his local people, especially he cares about the farmers who are the foundation of Susu, so I thought it was understandable, but I didn't hate it. However, my father in particular is one of the most important of my people, so you'd better not touch it. And I completely erased the smile I was wearing and looked straight at Chanton Susu. This is a warning. That's to keep him to be nervous. I raised the tail of my mouth again and said to Clarivan, please provide details about the compensation to the pallet's owner, to the Patriarch of Sisu, and get the payment commitment date in writing, of course. Having said that, I turned around and exited the conference room. I warned this black bear. I don't know exactly what Chanton Sisu is up to yet, but once I shot him, I felt refreshed. If I call Bay tomorrow and think about it, I'll know the answer quickly. The sound of my footsteps alone as I walked through the halls of the Imperial Palace was light. I've got a bit of a loose schedule today. This is because the conference ended too lightly than I thought. I really thought I was going to roll up my arms and stick together, so I even brought Clarivan in there. The face of Chanton Susu, who was sitting across from the conference room and looking at me calmly, came to mind, and now his face became frowned. If it's a bear, he'll eat honey in the warm south side like a bear. Ooh. Something hugged me and pulled me while I was muttering. Without a chance to shout out loud, I was standing inside the room and the door was closed before my eyes, and someone's solid body felt behind my back. At the moment when I blinked at the familiar scent that came on me, in an instant, I saw a green emerald ring on the fourth finger on the hand that embraced me. This time I could know without having to look back. I said, patting the hand with a small sigh, Perez, you scared me. Then his large hands hugged me, but hugged my body more greedily, and I felt a straight forehead rubbing against my neck and shoulders. I missed you, Tia. End of chapter 260.